Have you ever felt like you're just going through the motions? Like you're watching your own life from a distance, totally unable to connect with the highs or the lows? Well, that feeling, that's emotional numbness, and it's way more than just a bad mood. So stick with me, and we're going to break down why this happens and explore some real concrete steps you can take to move from that state of disconnection back to a life of feeling. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to put a name to that feeling of emptiness and really dig into its roots. Everything from our body's stress response to, believe it or not, the side effects of common medications. Then we'll pivot to the how. We're going to build a toolkit together with practical skills to handle distress and regulate our emotions. And finally, we'll look at the gentle, mindful steps that can help us reconnect with ourselves. All right, let's dive right in. What does it actually feel like to be emotionally numb? Because it's not just feeling sad or having an off day, right? It's this persistent sense of emptiness, of being totally cut off from your own inner world. The researcher Brené Brown just nails it with this quote: "We cannot selectively numb emotion. If we numb the dark, we numb the light." And that right there is the central paradox of numbness. It's a defense mechanism for sure, but the shield we put up to block out the pain, it ends up blocking our ability to feel joy, love, and real connection too. So what is going on in our minds when we feel this way? Well, experts call it a form of dissociation. The best way to think about it is like a mental circuit breaker. When an emotional surge is just too powerful to handle, your mind literally flips a switch. It creates distance to protect you from being completely overwhelmed. And this feeling, this numbness, it isn't just in your head, is it? It really affects your daily life. It can look like just going through the motions at work, really struggling to connect with the people you love, or feeling this weird sense of guilt because you're not happy at a birthday party or sad at a loss. These are all super common signs that your emotional system has just gone into protective mode. Okay, so why does this happen? It's so important to understand that emotional numbness is not a character flaw. It's not a sign of weakness. It is a survival response, a strategy our brain and body use when they're pushed way beyond their limits. A lot of the time, the root cause is just an overwhelmed stress response system. Our bodies are built to handle short bursts of stress, right? The whole fight or flight thing. But when you're faced with chronic pressure or a major trauma, that system can just overload. And just like that circuit breaker in your house, it shuts down to prevent any more damage. That shutdown, that's what we experience as emotional numbness. But here's the thing, trauma and stress aren't the only causes. Kind of ironically, sometimes the very medication that's supposed to help with emotional pain, like common antidepressants called SSRIs, can lead to a side effect they call emotional blunting, which feels a whole lot like numbness. And get this, it is surprisingly common. We're talking studies that show a staggering 40 to 60% of people taking SSRIs report this exact experience. The medication does its job, it dampens the pain, but it also mutes their ability to feel joy and other positive emotions right along with it. So why does that happen? Well, research from the University of Cambridge points to this thing called reinforcement sensitivity. Basically, these medications can turn down the volume on your brain's reward system. So a great meal, a compliment from a friend, a beautiful sunset, they just don't register with the same punch. It effectively flattens out the entire emotional landscape, the good and the bad. And beyond our brain chemistry, we also have to look at our basic biology. Our mental state is so deeply connected to our physical health. Think about it. Deficiencies in crucial nutrients like vitamin D because you're not getting enough sun, or magnesium that gets burned up by stress, can produce symptoms, fatigue, apathy, brain fog, that feel exactly like emotional numbness. Sometimes feeling nothing is just a sign that our body is missing something fundamental. Okay, so we've explored the what and the why. Now for the most important part, the how. How do we start to manage this experience? We're going to begin with a set of first aid skills for your emotions, techniques designed to help you just survive a crisis moment without making things worse. So to build our toolkit, it really helps to understand two different approaches. Think of distress tolerance like weathering a storm. You can't stop the rain, right? So you find shelter and you wait for it to pass. The goal is just survival. Emotion regulation, on the other hand, is more like changing the weather. It's about actively using tools to shift your internal state from stormy to calm. When you are right in that crisis moment, the most powerful tool is often simple distraction. Now, this isn't about ignoring the problem forever, but it's about shifting your focus just long enough for that intensity to fade. And a super helpful way to remember these distraction techniques is the acronym ACCEPTS. Let's just quickly walk through a couple of these. Activities could be anything that demands your full attention, like a complicated puzzle or a video game. Contributing is brilliant because it shifts the focus off of you by helping someone else. And sensations is all about grounding yourself in the physical world, maybe by holding a piece of ice or smelling a strong scent like peppermint oil. Each letter gives you a different path away from that immediate emotional pain. All right, distraction is great for getting through a crisis, but what about changing our emotional patterns for the long haul? Well, that's where our second toolkit, emotion regulation, comes in. These are strategies for when the emotion itself is the issue, and the goal is to actively influence how you feel. So the foundation of emotion regulation is this super simple but incredibly powerful idea. Our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all connected in a feedback loop. A negative thought can lead to a sad feeling, which might make us withdraw from people, which then just reinforces that initial thought that we're all alone. But here's the good news. You can break this cycle at any point. Now, it's really tempting to try and change our thoughts first, but they can be so stubborn, can't they? Often, the most powerful way to break the cycle is to start with your actions. By deliberately choosing to act differently, you can create a new feeling, which then leads to a new thought. The core strategy here is called opposite action. Basically, do the opposite of what that negative emotion is screaming at you to do. Here's what that looks like in real life. When you feel sad and the urge is to isolate yourself and crawl under the covers, the opposite action is to call a friend. When anxiety tells you to avoid a situation, you gently approach it instead. This isn't about ignoring your feelings, not at all. It's about showing yourself that you don't have to be controlled by them. And you can also use things like music or movies to intentionally create a different emotional state. But listen, none of these mental strategies will be effective if our physical foundation is shaky. And this is where the Please Master acronym is so helpful. It's a reminder that things like getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, and moving our bodies, these aren't luxuries. They are fundamental for emotional resilience. When we're physically depleted, we're just so much more vulnerable to emotional storms. And that masterpiece, doing one small thing each day to feel competent, that builds the self-trust you need to face difficult emotions. Okay, so we have our toolkits for managing those difficult moments, but how do we move from just managing to truly reconnecting? Well, the key here is that this is a gentle process. It is not about forcing yourself to feel, but about creating the right conditions for your feelings to safely return. The central practice for this is mindfulness. And this doesn't have to mean sitting on a cushion for an hour, I promise. At its core, mindfulness is simply the act of paying attention on purpose to the present moment, without any judgment. It's just noticing the warmth of a coffee cup in your hands or the feeling of your feet on the floor. It's about training your attention to stay in the now, instead of getting lost in yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's worries. John Kabat-Zinn, who's a huge figure in bringing mindfulness to the West, uses this beautiful metaphor. He says, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Our thoughts and emotions, they're the waves. They will always come and go. The goal of mindfulness isn't to have a perfectly calm, flat ocean of a mind. The goal is to develop the balance and the skill to ride those waves without getting pulled under. Ultimately, the journey out of numbness, it isn't a giant leap across some huge canyon. It's about laying down one small stone at a time to build a bridge back to yourself. It could be as simple as truly tasting your first sip of coffee, or listening to a favorite song with your eyes closed, or just stepping outside for 60 seconds to feel the air on your skin. These small acts of attention, that's the starting point. So the only question left is, what's one small step you can take today to invite feeling back into your life?